I am going to go ahead and kick us off. Let me introduce myself. So, most of you have seen me on social media. Most times that I hear people coming in, the people that do join and see me and find me are finding me either on Instagram, on TikTok. So, essentially, that's my kind of bread and butter. I love creating content and sharing career advice. But some people also have found me through LinkedIn. Some people have also seen me because of the fact that I have been featured in some news articles. So I've been on like BuzzFeed Insider and some other articles. I am a certified professional resume writer, so I do hold that credential. And I'm also a certified professional career coach. I have worked at companies like Google in their recruiting, where I recruited globally, as well as in Indeed. But Indeed, it was really interesting because I had the opportunity to work with different companies across different industries and actually acted as an extension of their recruiting teams. I had a lot of exposure to different type of roles, hiring for different profiles, working with different hiring managers across the globe. So it's really a great experience there. And it was one that I really was very appreciative of because I learned a lot. And outside of that, I am a mom, I'm a wife, I am a sister, I'm a daughter. Just want to give you a little snapshot into the people that I do life with. For me, it's really important, I think, to showcase that because the reason I got into what I do now and why I work with people is because I've been in the place where I've been looking for a job and I haven't been able to find a job. I didn't know how to write a resume. I've also been in the place where I've seen my dad struggle finding a job, my husband struggle finding a job. And so being able to help people that I love land opportunities through using a skill that I've been able to learn and craft really well has been really impactful for me. And then also having the opportunity to work with people. So I work with people in the United States, Europe, Africa, Asia, Australia. So it's really beautiful to be able to share these experiences with people and hear their stories when they're able to utilize a resume that we worked on together and land a new interview, ultimately resulting in them landing an offer and then starting their new job. So from that point on, just I'd now give you the snapshot into who I am. Let's go ahead and kind of get into things. When I say I've come a long way, I've really come a long way. This was a resume that I wrote back, I think, in maybe 2012 or so. And it was rough back then. And the thing that I like to show this and why I really share this with people is because a lot of people that I talk to really struggle when it comes to resume writing and really have a hard time with writing their resumes. And it's normal because that is not our area of expertise. We're not typically taught to write resumes and write them well. So the goal with writing your resume is to write it and make sure you can write it in a way that the employer is going to be able to see your experience and understand why you're fit for the role. You don't have to be an expert in resume writing, but it is an important skill to learn and to craft because typically as one goes throughout their career, we typically are making several changes throughout our career status as far as like going through our career journey. And so being able to know and understand how to write your resume and tailor your resume as needed is important, but it's not something that we typically learn as we enter our professional careers. And so a lot of times people do struggle to write their resumes. As you can see with mine, it was a whole mess there. So all the things that I tell people not to include, I have in my resume, like my full address. I have some random quotes. I don't even know where I got that from, an objective statement. My skills are all over the place. I list my responsibilities. These are all things that I'm like looking at resumes and I'm like, no, don't do it. But I want to show that to you just so you can see that you're not alone. So if this is what your resume looks like, it is okay. We're going to talk about how we want to go about writing our resume moving forward. And with that being said, I do want to, before we get into the bulk of kind of the deep dive of the resume writing, I want to talk about some of the myths. So, a lot of times that I talk to people, there are a lot of people that come and ask questions about writing resumes and the things that they're hearing because there's a lot of information out there. So, I fully understand why people are confused when it comes to resume writing because they're hearing different information from different people. And so I want to just take a few moments to kind of go through and bust some of the most common myths that I have personally encountered based on talking to people. as well as just watching content because I do, follow some really great creators and there's some amazing career coaches out there. But there's also some people that I have followed and I'm like, yeah, I don't know what we're doing. Sometimes I've given some advice and some feedback, but hasn't always been received well. But we're going to talk about some of those resume myths that I've seen. And so one of the big ones is that the one size fits all. Using a single resume that you're going to use to apply for every single role. This is one of the myths that I day in and day out tell people that the reality is that this typically does not work. There is going to have to be some tailoring that you will have to do to your resume. What I also tell people is that there are a lot of times where people think that they have to completely rewrite their resume, and part of the tailoring process is doing a whole revamp. That is not the case either. So, we're going to talk about what that actually means. But this is one thing that I do like to call out because it is important, especially in today's job market, where we're seeing a lot of people in the market. There are a lot of industries that are being impacted by layoffs and budget cuts and so forth. So we want to be strategic, we want to be intentional and take that extra couple minutes to make a few tweaks to our resume as we're applying to different roles. The next thing that I hear is formatting. So there are going to be certain industries. So if you're maybe in a more of a creative industry, for example, where you're a UX designer, or if you are even an architect, if you are maybe in some facets of marketing, for example, where having more of an elaborate design where you're adding some of kind of like maybe the fancier fonts, the colors, some of the boxes, I would say that would be something that would make sense. But for the most part, when it comes to writing your resume, the biggest thing that you need to worry about is the content. So you don't have to worry about creating a fancy resume. A single column resume is fine. The biggest thing is what is the information that you are putting into that resume? And is that information relevant to the employer? That is going to be key because without that, then you're not going to get callbacks for interviews. So I always tell people don't worry about necessarily what it looks like in the sense as long as the information is organized, focus on what you're actually writing in your document. The next one is that a lot of people still write their resumes in the sense of they're describing their scope and their impact in way of writing down their responsibilities and their duties. So they're kind of writing their resume like a job description. So this is where we really want to focus on how we're changing our language. And so one of the big things right now, and later in the presentation, I will give you a stat on this, but you really want to take some time and focus on your accomplishments and your achievements and showcase the impact where possible. One of the things I also hear, and we'll talk about this later as well, is that I talk to a lot of people that don't necessarily feel like they have achievements or accomplishments. They feel like they don't have anything that they can showcase, but there are ways that you can kind of dig down into your experience and like reflect on that and you can pull that information out. And I tell everybody, I promise you, it doesn't matter if you are working in a restaurant, if you're working as an automotive technician, if you're working at a grocery store, if you are a data analyst, there are some sort of metrics, some way that you can quantify and showcase not just what you're doing, but some of the impact and why that's important and relevant and showcasing your potential, showcasing what you're bringing to the table. So we'll talk more about that a little bit later on. And then before we go into, again, the deep dive of the resume, I do want to take a moment to talk about the applicant tracking system. This is a hot topic. This topic is one that not only do I talk to fellow job seekers, I also talk to other career coaches and have conversations because some of the information that we see out there is not always accurate. And so, what I'd like to do is start by talking about what the applicant tracking system actually does. So, when you go to a company's job board and you apply to the job, typically you're applying through their applicant tracking system. And you have to go through, unfortunately, more times than not, some sort of lengthy application. Some companies are good about streamlining that process, but you have to fill out an application. Once you submit your resume is going through some sort of scan. And so that is the applicant tracking system. So typically, what companies are using the ATS system is to really streamline their process. So recruiters have access primarily to the database, to the ATS system. It's either going to be recruiting or it's going to be HR professionals, so maybe like an HR manager, it might be an HR generalist. If it's a smaller company, sometimes it goes directly to the hiring manager. So size of company also does, matter as far as who actually receives the information. But more times than not, it's going to be someone in HR and in recruiting. And so they have access to go into the ATS system. And what the ATS system is doing, primarily the function of it is to use it as like a digital filing cabinet. So it's to organize candidates' information. So any job seekers that are applying to the role, your profile, your application is being filed in the ATS. There is a component where, yes, it is scanning your resume. Yes, it does sort through the resumes. Yes, it does rank the resumes. Yes, it does look for keywords. Yes, it may scan based on, for example, like if they're looking for a specific number of years of experience. And so they want 5 years of experience in project management, but you only have 3, for example. And in the ATS and the way they have that role profile set up is that one of the things that they're scanning for is years of experience. Then yes, that could be a factor that they're reviewing. But primarily when it comes to rejecting applications, normally when applications are rejected, they're rejected because of the fact that there are knockout questions during the application process. And those knockout questions are going to be questions that ask you maybe about your location. So if they need somebody in a specific location, if the role is requiring, say, a specific degree credential and you don't have that degree credential, if again, they're asking for, do you have 5 years of project management and they want you to say yes, but you say no, then that it could be knocking you out as being considered for that role. So then your resume has not been seen, it's being rejected, and it does go to a reject pile, but it's still within the system. So if a recruiter say wanted to go through those files, they could find your information, but initially those knockout questions are there to essentially help filter out candidates and job seekers that are applying to the role and really focus on the roles, the profiles that are going to be the strongest match for what they're looking for. And then the other thing is that when it comes to the applicant tracking system, there isn't any way around it unless, say, you have somebody at the company that you know, or you've networked and you're able to pass your resume directly to somebody. Otherwise, you have to apply to the role. It's going to go through some sort of ATS scan. There are different ATS systems. There are some that are more common than others. Some of the common ones are Workday, Taleo, Jazz HR, ADP, and they all operate pretty similarly as kind of the overall function. But with the ATS systems, there are options for companies to customize what they actually screen for and how in depth these ATS systems can operate. So, depending on the ATS system, depending on the customizations, then essentially the screening may be a bit more intensive maybe than compared to other companies, but there's no way for you to know that. So there's no way around it. There's no way to know that piece. So the best bet for you is to make sure that when you are submitting your resume, that you really follow kind of the guidelines with putting a well-rounded resume together that is going to be ATS friendly, and it's also going to be recruiter friendly, and it's also going to be hiring manager friendly. So there's essentially 3 audiences that you should be appealing to when you are writing your resume. on a final note, just to kind of recap with the ATS capabilities. So typically, they're going to be parsing the resume, so scanning the resume, looking for things like job title, dates, locations, education. So parsing through your resume to pull that information, and also keyword matching as well. Candidate ranking. So essentially, if it can scan your resume and if it's one of the ATS systems that does scan and also rank and prioritize your resume, there are systems that also will tell a recruiter, like, this candidate is a X number percent match based on these criteria. So that's one of the things that it can do. And then recruiters do use it for analytics. So a lot of times on the recruiting side, we'll pull data to present to hiring managers to help educate them on how long it's taking people to go through the hiring process, how many people we've gotten through the process, what are some of the knockouts. So if there are knockout questions, what is typically knocking out job seekers from being able to move forward in the role? So there's a lot of analytics that we can pull and that we utilize to try and have conversations with hiring managers to help inform hiring decisions, to help influence and say if maybe a hiring manager is very strict on their role requirements, and help them try to see where it might be beneficial to loosen up on the requirements so we can actually find somebody that has the potential to perform and do well in the role that they're hiring for. So those are the capabilities typically that the applicant tracking system has. Now is the time for us to get into the actual resume itself. So we talked about myths, we talked about the applicant tracking system. Now we're going to actually get into, let's talk about putting together a resume and what that entails. So a few pro tips that I always like to share with people that I work with, and as I build out their resumes, one of the exercises that I do with individuals is I tell them that there are three things that you need to do to set yourself up for success, because resume writing is hard, job searching is hard, and it's a full-time job trying to find a job. So this is one thing that I have found that is very helpful for people. And one of those things is just knowing what your target is. And I'll get more into this in a second. Uncovering what your professional brand is, and then doing the market research. So when it comes to defining your target, so this means knowing the roles that you're targeting. So sometimes people know what is the role that they're targeting. Sometimes people want to target a few different type of role profiles. So if you are targeting, say, a few different type of roles, know what those roles are. I typically tell people focus on maybe 2 to 3 different type of roles maxed, because you really want to be strategic and making sure that you're putting your time and energy in a place where you're going to see results, where you're not going to feel like you're spinning your wheels. So getting a list of, like, making sure you understand what are your target roles is important. Some people have companies that they know they want to work for. So I typically will tell people, create a list of companies. If you are searching based on company, have a list of your, like, these are the companies I would love to work for. So your top companies, your mid companies where you're like, okay, I could see myself here. It's not going to be like my bread and butter. It's not going to be my dream company, but I can see myself being here. And then the companies where you're like, okay, if I need, push comes to shove and I really need to just, like, get into a role, make a change, these are the companies that I would target. They all serve a purpose, but it's good to prioritize and kind of rank the companies that you are looking at and considering, because then again, strategically speaking, you can figure out how you're going to organize your time, where you're going to put your time and energy. And then also, as you write your resumes, then there might be situations where you're spending more time tailoring your resume, say if it's for a company for a role that you really really want, versus for a company where you're like, okay, like, I can do that, I'm all right with it, but it's not my, like, top job, not my top company, and maybe you spend less time. So it helps kind of prioritize your time as well. And then the other thing is that more and more people are talking about company culture. So the other thing I tell people is, if that's important to you, then take time and look at the company culture. So look at their mission statements, look at their values, do a quick Google search and see what are other people saying about their experience there. So that can be something that you do that will help influence your decision as far as like whether the company is going to be a match for you or not, or whether you see yourself in that company or not. And then it can also help with your resume writing because then if say you're going to spend extra time tailoring your resume for a company that you really are excited about, you really want the role, then you might be able to refer to some of those key points as it relates to their values or their mission statement, for example, and tie a piece of that into your resume. And then when it comes to your personal brand, this one is important because nowadays a lot of companies, they want to see your experience, they want to see your value, kind of what are you bringing to the table, but you should know your brand, your professional brand, and how you're going to show up because this you can reflect in your resume, this you can utilize in your LinkedIn profile if you have one, this can be utilized when you're networking, this also when you're interviewing for roles. Understanding what your professional brand is and your personal brand is going to help you just set yourself up for your search, framing the narrative of your resume. So I tell people take some time and just really understand what your brand is. And so typically what that looks like is I will tell people gather feedback. So maybe you reach out to people that know you. If you have had good relationships with like peers that you've worked with previously or currently work with managers, even family, friends, or you look at previous like performance reviews if you have had say good performance reviews and what are some of the things that are being said in those reviews, look for themes across those. Also when you think about the work that you've done, so when I say themes, what is it that you've been known for, what have you been asked to do on a consistent basis, what are things that you enjoy doing and that you find that you are consistently leaning into. Those are all things that are part of your brand and your identity and how you show up in the workplace. And then self-reflection is important too because then thinking about just your own personal identity and how you want people to see you as a professional and as on a personal level is important because that is also going to dictate how you're showing up again when it comes time for you to write your resume and showcase a little bit of that personality in your resume, how you're going into conversations when you are getting ready to interview and really wanting to show up in those interviews and what your brand is and who you are. And yes, I am who I say I am, and this is what I bring to the table, and this is what I offer, this is what I'm known for. Those things are important. So I tell people to take some time and just do a little soul searching and just do a little digging there to just really get a good handle on your brand. And then going back to the first item here on this slide about your research. So when it comes to research, it's also important to understand what are the skills that they're asking for. Are there any certifications that you're going to need? What are keywords that you're seeing consistently across different job descriptions? And those are things that maybe you need to have in your resume. So that's where some of that market research will come into play. Now that we've got done the pre-work, and so if you take the time to do that pre-work, the next thing that I tell people is you need to decide what your format is going to be. And this is important because of the fact that showcasing your skills, your experience, your accomplishments in a way that is going to resonate with that employer, with that jobs, the recruiter, with the role that you're applying to. Like you want to make sure that you are aligning as much as you can in the format is going to help you do that. So that it can also help you stand out against other people because if your information is organized and is set up in a way that is quick for the employer to understand and see that you're the one for the job versus someone that just has a whole bunch of skills all over the place, they're not really talking about any of their achievements, they're not showcasing their education, they're not showcasing any of their certifications, they're not showcasing anything about them as far as their professional brand, for example. They're not clearly articulating, is this the role that I'm applying for, by just simply putting this is my target title. Your resume is going to stand out against another person's resume. So when it comes to formatting, there are three different types of formattings that you can consider using. And those are going to be the chronological, the functional, and the hybrid. And each of these formats serve a different purpose. And there are different reasons why you would use these formats versus why maybe you wouldn't. And of course, there's always going to be pros and cons to both. So when it comes to the chronological format, one of the big things with a chronological resume is that you're just listing your experience in chronological order from most current, then working your way back. So you can see that there's an example here where we have somebody that has their contact information, a professional summary, their chronological work history, skills, and education, and done. This one is going to be the most common for hiring managers. They typically see resumes come in this format. And this is going to be one that is going to be most compatible with the ATS. What I will say is that while it's most compatible, the other two formats are fine to use. The only thing that becomes challenging with those is that you are going to have to take an extra step in the sense that you're more likely in the application part of it when it's copying over your information. It's probably not going to format correctly. So you're going to want to go in and make sure that your application is correct, that your dates are correct, the job titles are correct, the companies are correct. So you're going to just have to take that extra step to do your due diligence to make sure the information is correct in the application. But as far as on the back end and how they view the resume and receive it, it'll be fine for those other two formats, which we'll discuss in a moment. But this one is definitely one that is most commonly used. And the nice thing about this is that it also is good for career progression, showcasing that you've had like a steady career path. It also is good because it's just, again, one of the more common ones. But on the flip side, there are a few disadvantages, I would say, that you could potentially come across when you're using this format. And for people that maybe have had frequent job changes or have bigger gaps in their career, this is going to make it more visible. And so that is a disadvantage in the sense that you're going to have to do more explaining essentially. And so either way, you'll have to explain those situations, but it just draws more attention if you are in one of those scenarios. And then also, this does not necessarily focus on transferable skills. So, say if you're in a position where you are looking to make a career change and you're going from your current role in industry to a completely different role in industry, this may not be the best format to help you showcase some of those transferable skills that you may want to showcase to show them, well, hey, I don't have the hands-on experience you're looking for, but I do have the transferable skills that you're looking for, and here's why you should consider my application. So this resume probably wouldn't be the best option for that type of scenario, specifically on the career change side. But it is good if you have a steady work history in a particular field or industry. This is a great one to utilize. The next one is a functional format. So this is the one where typically on the career changing side, people will tend to use this. So this is more if you're going from one role in industry to a different role in industry. This could be a good option for you where you want to showcase your skills and group those into categories or themes versus breaking down your history in chronological order, because then you can focus on, hey, here are the skills that I have that you're looking for. Here's how you utilize those skills. And then you'll still have your work experience in there, but it's not going to be followed by bullet points. Your bullet points are going to be more in that section where you group those skills that you're trying to highlight. So again, this could be good for career changers. This can also be good in the sense of if you say have a consistent theme of kind of where you've had multiple employment gaps or you change jobs frequently, this could help minimize the focus of that, which is why this could be a good option for that scenario. But then on the flip side of that, again, as I stated earlier, this is one that is going to be less familiar for some hiring managers. It is more of an unconventional format. And then on the ATS side, when I said it's not ATS friendly, just keep in mind if you use that format, you're going to have to take an extra step with your application to make sure that you're double checking that all the information that you need to have in your application is there. So that can be something that is time consuming if you're applying to multiple roles. So it just might not be the best option in that scenario if like you're applying to a lot of roles and having to spend a lot of time in applications. But at the end of the day, it is going to be a personal decision. We'll talk a little bit more about how to weigh out kind of the pros and cons there to determine what's best for you. And then the last one is a hybrid format. So this one is similar to both the chronological format as well as the functional format as well. So the positives for this specifically, and I typically like to use this format, is that it really helps bring a good blend of experience in the sense of you have your professional summary, you have your skills overview, you can call this like your areas of expertise, for example, and then you go into your work history. So it gives recruiters a quick snapshot on like, here's who I am, here's what I'm bringing to the table, here are my core attributes, and then here's my history. So that's why I like this one and tend to lean towards this one as a personal preference. But again, it's going to be a personal decision. But I do find that when I write resumes for people, that I tend to lean more on this side when it comes to using a hybrid format versus the other two options. And then again, this emphasizes both showcasing skills, also career progression. But then on the flip side, you have to keep in mind that you want to make sure you're weighing out those pros and cons and making sure that you're making the best decision. And so side by side here, again, we're showcasing chronological, functional, and hybrid format. And then as far as making the decision for which format is going to be best for you, this is where I tell people it's not a one size fits all. And so the reason why a lot of times you hear a lot of conflicting advice when it comes to resume writing is for this very reason, is because what resume writing is not a one size fits all. There are going to be times where you're going to need to evaluate your work experience, your skills, and your objectives to make sure you're using a format that is going to be best suited for your situation. The resumes that are written are not all equal in the sense that it's important to research your resume format that is typical for your role in industry and make sure that you're creating a resume that is aligned. So doing a quick Google search and searching for resumes for this role, this industry, what is the standard, and running a quick Google search, going through some images and seeing what are the types of resumes that people are creating. This could be a good signal for you to say, okay, I need to use a chronological format. Okay, I need to use a hybrid format. Okay, it makes more sense for me to use a functional format. So doing that research is going to be important because depending on role and industry, resume writing can look different. And the last point that I tell people is that sometimes it is a little bit of trial and error. So some people are kind of on the cusp of, well, maybe a chronological format will work for them, but they're also maybe considering a career change. So they try a chronological format. They're not getting any results as far as getting interviews for the roles that they're applying to. So then maybe you pivot and you try a functional format and see if that performs better. So I tell people that if you're applying to roles and you're not getting responses, it could be a good idea for you to switch up the format and see if the organizing the information a little bit differently is going to help you as far as standing out and being able to showcase your experience. And some general basics and rules of thumb. This guidance is pretty standard. I also pulled this information just being a certified professional resume writer. So, as being a CPRW, which is a global standard for resume writing, there are certain guidelines that they propose as far as like what is standard for resume writing. So, these are some of the things that they state. One of them is the font size should be between 10 and 12. I typically lean more on the 10 point size, especially when I'm trying to write someone's resume that has, 20, 30 years of experience, and we're trying to really be strategic about how we're organizing the information. I'm not going to use 12-point font. I want to maximize, the space that I have. So I will leverage a 10-point font, but that is the general rule of thumb. And then as far as pages go, this is another one that I probably should have put into the myth section, but I do want to emphasize on this because this is a big topic for controversy is one page versus 2-page resumes. And so what I say to this is that You need to write your resume and use the amount of space that you need in order to show your experience. Typically, if you are just graduating, you are probably going to be able to fit your information into a single page. But as you get into the 3, 4, 5 plus 6 year mark and having industry work experience, that could look different. You might end up needing at the 3 year mark a 2 page resume, depending on your role and your industry. And so that's where I tell people it's really important to do what you need to do for you in the sense of like, you know, your field and your industry. If you feel like the information that you're including is not enough, probably isn't enough. So it might mean that you need to go into a second page. What I will say is that I have seen people that say straddle the fence of like, oh, I'm on 1.25 pages. Then I tell people you need to pick a side. You're either on one page or you're into a second page. So then I tell people if you're at that 1.25 mark and you want to expand out and maybe go to like the 1.5 page mark, then do that. But you need to pick a side at that point. So that would just be the one time where I kind of am more firm in my stance and telling people like from a presentation standpoint, it is important in that sense to either do one or the other. Similar to like if you have a second page and you're deciding if you need to go into a third page, well, you're either going to have a second page if you're at like 2.25 pages, or you're going to go into that third page and own it and go into that third page. With resume writing, one of the exceptions that I always call out is there are certain industries. So, like federal is a really great example where when you're writing a federal resume, if you're considering federal roles, they want to know your entire life pretty much. So, you need to get detailed, and that is going to be a situation where you're doing more of the roles and the responsibilities. Yes, you'll still do some of the achievements and metrics, but they do want to understand the responsibilities and duties. So that is going to be more of a lengthy resume. So typically, federal resumes do tend to be at least 2 pages, but it's not uncommon for them to go into a third, fourth. I've seen ones that are even like 5 pages, for example, just depending on your years of experience. And then other industries might be if say you're in a research role, for example, where you're doing a lot of publications, or if you're a doctor or a lawyer, then that could look a bit different as far as the length of the resume. But general rule of thumb, 1 to 2 pages should suffice. And then going into the format, you want to make it easy to read. So we want to make sure we have the appropriate headlines that were, caps and bolding those headlines. So your education, your profile summary, your work experience, making sure those headlines are clear. You want to make sure the spacing in your lines are correct in the sense that they're all equal. And you want to leave some white space too. And so that's that easy to read component. And then organizing your information. So that's where choosing the format. So are you going to use a chronological? Are you going to use a functional resume? And just making sure that you're organizing your information based on the choice that you make for how you're formatting your resume. And then the other component is having a master versus specialized. So when I say master versus specialized, that means typically people will have a master resume. And this is, their go-to resume that they use, but they will then have specialized resumes, meaning this is the resume that they've made some tweaks to for a specific role. And so that's where that specialized resume comes in. But you're typically not making big tweaks. We're making small tweaks in the sense of it might be a few keywords, it might be adding in a bullet point, it might be removing a bullet point. But the master resume is where I tell people maybe you have like a lot of your information and then you kind of like can plug and play as you're applying for roles. And so maybe you're adding bullet points, you're removing bullet points as needed, but this is kind of your go-to, that's your catch-all resume that really is the foundation and basis for how you tailor your other resumes. And then the last component is Word versus PDF. So I do tell people PDF is going to be the preferred format unless specified otherwise. There are still job descriptions that, and not many, but I have seen a few that will ask for a Word document versus a PDF. But if it does not specify, I would recommend submitting your resume as a PDF document. And now we'll get into structure. And then I also have some examples that we'll go through. So with the resume structure, it's pretty standard that you're going to have these sections. So you're going to have your contact information, a target title or career focus, your profile summary, you're going to have your skills and core competencies, you're going to have work experience, your education, and then there are some optional sections that you can have. And this again is just going to depend on your situation, in the sense like volunteer experience might come in if you're making a career change and you have experience because you volunteered, and so you want to showcase that experience. Then you would have a volunteer section talking about that experience because it directly is related to the role that you're trying to pivot into. Or say awards and achievements, maybe you're really trying to showcase that you are known for certain things. So maybe you've won like leadership awards, for example, or maybe you're a new graduate and so you've won awards at school that you want to showcase. That could be a section that you create. Publications, again, if you're more like in teaching, or if you're in a research type role, that could be where maybe utilize that section. So there are some of those optional sections, and there's a few others that you can use essentially. And from there, when we begin writing our resume, I do tell people that it's important when you're crafting your resume, you always want to go in with the mindset of thinking about not just where you have been, but focusing on where you are trying to go. This is really important when it comes to resume writing, and why a lot of people will talk about tailoring the resume. It's because you want to focus on where is it that you're trying to go, and your resume should be reflecting that. And so I tell people, like, yes, it's great you have your experience that you can speak to, but when you're talking about your experience, when you're tailoring your resume, really think about where are you going? What is that next role that you're trying to get? And that's the mindset that you should be using in writing the resume and tailoring your resume. And going back to the breakdown of the structure, so for contact information, it's pretty straightforward: name, email, phone number, if you have LinkedIn. So this is another one where I have people that will say some people just are not LinkedIn. It's not their thing. Some people can't have it for personal reasons, safety reasons. So there's different reasons why people don't have a LinkedIn profile. If you have one, I recommend having it on your resume. If you don't, then you just don't include anything there. And then if you're in an industry where you've created a portfolio, so again, think about architect, so I've worked with people that have portfolios there, graphic designers, if you are a software developer and maybe you are new in the field and you're trying to showcase some of your work. So you have a GitHub, for example, which is a platform that you can create projects on. So if you have a portfolio, include that information in there, because you want to make it easy for the employer to find your information. You want to make it easy for them to be able to go to that profile, go to that portfolio, and not having them search for that information. So if you can provide that up front, it's only going to benefit you. Will they go to it all the time? No, they won't. But there are more times than not that I say that typically, if someone's looking at your resume and you include that information, they are going to look at the resources that you have provided. And then as far as the address goes, that used to be a thing where you include your address. Now it's either just city or state, or city and country. You don't have to worry about including your entire address. So do not include that. And then the target title, this is going to be more important. And I tell people, if you have not held the title for the role that you are applying to, having target title, so you have your contact information and you have target title underneath that, could be a good thing to do. And the reason for that is because, going back to the ATS scan, going back to, say, someone looking at your resume, when they're looking at your resume, for example, if it's someone who's skimming through your resume and they're saying, oh, this person has never held this job title, or this person doesn't have this experience, we want to make it clear that, yes, this is the role that I'm applying to. This is the title of the role that I'm applying to. There's no question. Like, no, it's not a mistake. I'm applying to this role because I want to apply to this role. And then the other thing is, with the applicant tracking system, you want to make sure that if it's, say, scanning, like part of one of the things that the ATS does will scan titles. So if you've never had that job title that you're applying to, you want to make sure that you include it as your target title. So at least as part of the ATS scan, if the ATS is scanning for job titles, it is going to be able to recognize and register that, yes, you have that title on your resume. So those would be the two reasons why I say that's important to have that target title. But if you're in a situation where, say, you've already been in the role that you're applying to and so forth, and you've held a job title, it's not as important. But just to kind of give you that differentiation on when to use it, when not to. And some people just like to have the target title just because they want to make sure that it's just clear that, yes, this is, again, the role that I'm applying to. And then going into the next section. So typically, what I recommend with people writing their resumes, I am one that says yes to professional summaries. There will be some people that say, no, don't worry about having a professional summary. Where I think it can be helpful is that the professional summary, if you choose to create one, I personally, when I write resumes, I do include a professional summary for people. And it's brief, it's like 3 to 5 sentences max. But the reason is because you want to grab the attention. Because typically, when a recruiter or hiring manager is going to look at your resume and run through it the first time around, they're typically spending on average about 7 to 10 seconds. I think the stat that I saw most recently was 6.7 seconds is what they're spending initially skimming through your resume before they decide if they're going to spend time deep diving into your resume. So some of what they're looking at is, of course, the title. If they see this professional summary, for example, and you say you have X number of years of experience, you have these 3 skills. And so I'll show you a couple of examples here in a second that you have achieved this, that's going to catch their attention. And then, they can go through the rest of their experience there and see the rest of that information in your resume. But it's more of like, we want to grab their attention. We want them to see our value add right at the beginning. And I think that is why, for me personally, I choose to write those professional summaries for people, and have seen a lot of success in doing so with the resumes that I have written. And then just putting on my recruiter hat when I was in recruiting, those typically were resumes that kind of stood out to me, where it's like, okay, what is this person talking about? And I see that information. And so I would then spend some more time kind of looking through their resume. So for me, it's more of like, I've done that for resume writing, and I've also, on the recruiting side, reflecting back, those have been the resumes that have stood out to me, which is why I personally make that choice. But is it required? No, it's not required. So I do want to make that clear. It's not required. Do I think it's beneficial? Yes. And the one thing I will also emphasize here is that one of the questions I get asked a lot is the objective versus the professional summary. This is a huge question I get from a lot of people. What is the difference between an objective statement and a professional summary? So an objective is you basically telling them what they can do for you. Whereas a professional summary is you telling them what you can do for them. And in most cases, especially in today's job market, employers want to see, what can you do for them? And when you think about the number and volume of job applicants, typically for every job role, on average, and this is not across the board for every industry, but on average, 250 people apply for a single role. So it is competitive. So this is important. If you're going to include a professional summary, it's important to focus on what can you do for them. And so what I tell people is that when we look at examples, so in this case, this person is saying that they're an experienced IT professional. Good. Okay, great. I don't know how much experience they have, but they do say that they have a strong background in network administration, security. Okay, so that tells me a few of their core competencies, like the areas that they've really worked within. So that could be good. But then they're talking about what they're looking for. They're seeking a challenging role at this company where they can utilize their skills, but they're not really talking about anything impactful as far as like, what are you going to be able to offer and bring the company? Like, yes, you're seeking to use your skills, but what are you bringing to them? Like, you're going to use the skills and do what? Like, and that's the big piece. Is like the objective doesn't really tell the employer what you can do for them or showcase your impact. It doesn't grab that attention like, okay, this person, wow, they've done this. This is the experience that they have. This is what they're going to bring to the table. And that's what we want to do. We want to grab their attention. So this example here is different. So this person is talking about how they're highly skilled. That's generic, but then they go into having 10 years of experience. That catches my eye. So if I'm seeing, okay, this person has 10 years of experience and I know my hiring manager is looking for 7 to 10 years of experience, immediately check. Okay, this person checks that box. Then they talk about network administration, cybersecurity, and system upgrades. These are all of the things that my hiring manager said they're looking for. Check, check, check. All of the keywords they just hit on. They have a proven track record of managing large scale network security projects. My manager said they wanted somebody that has had experience with large scale projects. Check. And then they've also been able to deliver a reduction of system vulnerabilities by 40%. So this is an actual deliverable, an example of not just them saying, here are the attributes that I have, here are here's the scale of the projects that I've managed, but here's an actual deliverable. So I'm like, wow, okay, so this is big. And then they also talk about leading cross-functional teams and exceeding project. And then they talk about their recognition for expertise in developing and implementing comprehensive security strategies and supporting business objectives. So some of those key words. So that's where this is a good place too, where if you're thinking about job descriptions and keywords, you can include some keywords in there too to kind of make sure, again, that you're including information that are going to be skills that they're looking for, keywords that they're looking for, phrases that they're looking for. It's going to go through the ATS scan. The ATS is going to scan it and see, okay, oh, these are some of the keywords. And so it's going to check the boxes for the ATS scan. So this could be a good place to put some of that information in there. And this can also be a good place for you to also include, say, some like transferable skills or some soft skills, for example. So this section is good for that reason, and also why I really like having a professional summary, because it gives that opportunity to include some of that information that we need to include when it comes to grabbing the attention, showcasing our experience in a quick snapshot, highlighting some keywords that not only might they be looking for on a recruiting standpoint, skimming through the resume or the hiring manager, but also on the ATS side, and then maybe some of the soft skills or transferable skills that we want to showcase. And then also looking at new grad, for example. So this one is going to be a little bit different. So if you are a new graduate, you're just coming out of college, you don't have work experience, then you can't talk about years of experience, for example, but you can say that you're a new grad, you can say that you have this degree, you can say that you're bringing your experience from your academic background, and then talking about marketing strategies, financial analysis, and operational management. So those are all tied to maybe courses that this person did. So they're bringing that more of that theoretical knowledge from their coursework that is directly related and tied to what the job role is asking for. They're talking about how they have experience through their internships, but then they also have the theoretical knowledge that they can use that in practical settings. And then this one, because they don't have work experience, in my mind would make sense to say, they're ready to leverage education and internship experience to contribute to a workplace, because it's more of like, well, I don't have the industry experience, so this is my value add. I'm ready to jump in there and hit the ground running because I do have the education to back me up. I have these internships to back me up. And I also have, the knowledge of being able to then take and use that in a practical setting in the workforce. So this could be a good example for someone who's a new grad. And then thinking about just whole picture. So what we just talked about was, of course, professional summary. So this is typically the formula for that, with the exception of the new grad example. But normally it's going to be calling out your years of experience, calling out a few of the core skills, some of those maybe key words that you want to showcase, and then maybe a measurable accomplishment. Okay, now we're going to go into work experience. So this is probably my favorite section to talk about outside of transferable skills. But the work experience section, of course, is important because that's a must have. Like, one of the things that they're looking for is going to be the work experience. And so we want to make sure that we are showcasing our experience in a way That is going to be, yes, one ATS focus, but also going to be focused towards the recruiter who might be looking at it, a hiring manager, and whoever else on the team that they might pass it along to. So we want to make sure that the keywords that we need are in there. We want to quantify where possible. We want to use methods like either the CAR or TAB formula. So the CAR formula is challenge. What was the challenge? What is the action you took? And what was the result from that? Or TAB is going to be the task benefit. So using some sort of formula that essentially you're showcasing not just what you did, but why was this important? Essentially, what was the result from that? And so if you can use that sort of formula as much as possible, it's just going to help give you a more well-rounded view. It's going to help add color to your resume. It's going to help them understand, like, yes, I delivered this, but here, is essentially why I did this, or here is, how it impacted the company, for example. So that's really where that formula comes into play. And then when it comes to your bullet points, we're not listing out responsibilities. We want to focus on impact where we can, achievements where we can. And so we're going to get into more of the depth of the achievements in the sense of, like, well, what if I don't have like the millions of dollars of revenue, or the percentage of, I decreased this. And so how do I talk about my experience? So we'll talk about that too. And then the final point I just want to reiterate is that we want to focus on where we're going. So tying it to the jobs that we're applying to, not necessarily where we have been. We need to make sure we're focusing and targeting our message. So here I've included, I have two examples actually. So this is the first one. So this first one is an example of a resume that came to me, and this resume had a lot of information, just very, very general speaking. So they don't have any sort of metrics, achievements. There's no colors in the sense of, like, I know that you, for example, remained up to date on SOPs and you held a team accountable, but why was this important? I don't know. I know that you led and supported the training of new hires, but why is this important? I don't know. So it just leaves a lot of question marks, where it's very, to me, it reads more like a job description, which is okay, which is why we work together on the resume, because again, a lot of people that write their resumes are not experts, and it's not meant for you to be an expert in writing your resume. But once you understand how to approach resume writing, then you can start to be more intentional about how you're positioning yourself in your resume. So then on the second side, of the example, again, from the top, I included a professional summary for her. So talking about having 4 years of experience, these are the core areas that she supported: operational leadership, customer service excellence, team development, what she's known for. So these are things that I was able to call out in her experience, and I was able to take and transform her experience working in, primarily she worked as a manager in coffee shops, and then she had an assistant management role, but then kind of elevate that. So, some of the things that we did, for example, is that we talked about how she managed up to 300 customer orders per shift, because this was a very busy store. So you being able to physically manage orders coming in up to 300 customers, and that shows that just how quickly you have to work, how on top of it you have to be in order to make sure that you are delivering the beverages to these people. Like, that's no small feat. Like, that's a lot of work. And so that shows that this person is quick on their toes, they're flexible, they're adaptable, they can get things done. And so that's really where that is important. Showcasing that number really showcases, yes, like, it's one thing to say that you took orders on your shift, but if you can say, like, yeah, I had to take 300 different orders per shift, and then focus on custom beverages, so that's that attention to detail. Then you also had to give each of your customers a personalized approach because they have custom orders. These are all showing how you're adaptable, flexible, how you can be quick, and not only that, but you are very detail oriented. So that, in that one example and that bullet point, can showcase all of that. And that is something that the reader could be able to see, engage from that specific bullet point. And then kind of going into some of the achievements. So, like, calling out that this person was hand selected to lead and build out a learning and development strategy. So initially she had just talked about how she was training and supporting new hires, but little did I know until she told me, but she was actually hand selected. This was one store, they were expanding to a second store, and she was actually in the process of getting a promotion, and they had asked her to lead training and development. because they wanted to make sure there was consistency across both of the stores as they were continuing to expand. That is an important detail for an employer to know, because that shows that senior management selected her. So this was not something that she just, out of nowhere randomly got this opportunity. Her managers saw the work that she was doing, and then she also was pivoting into a completely different role than she had. So they identified that a strength of hers was learning and development. So they actually wanted her to lean into that. So that shows again that she's able to pivot, and that they see her potential, and that they saw her strength in learning and development, and then also supporting expansion. So the fact that she was selected to support not one, but also a new store. So she is selected to streamline process and make sure that as they scale, that they are going to scale and everybody is going to be on the same page. So when we're writing our bullet points, thinking about how that information is going to be read as a recruiter, that's how I would have read that information. And when I'm looking at bullet points, it's important to show some of that information, because that's what you want them to see. It's like you want them to see like why what you did was important. You want them to see what your potential is, what skills you might have used in order to perform that function. So this is one example. And then on the flip side, I have another example where this individual so she's currently self-employed, but one of the things for her is that she doesn't have a lot of numbers. For her, she's like, I don't know. I can't quantify. I just don't have it. And that is okay too. Sometimes people just don't have the numbers and don't feel confident or comfortable quantifying. So what I tell people is don't make up numbers just to make up numbers. If you have information that you can showcase to quantify, great. If you don't, then focus on the language that you're using and making sure that when you're talking about how you're performing your work. So in this case, for her, one of the things under her current role at being self-employed, we talk about how she is the subject matter expert between the technological and business objectives. She's the one that's tailoring IT objective initiatives. She's the one that's aligning and achieving strategic goals and delivering beneficial outcomes. So while we're not specifically calling out how many projects she worked on, the timeline for these projects, or anything of that nature, we're using language to position her as the expert in her field, that she's the one that's being leveraged, that when it comes time for them to utilize her skills, she's the go-to person. So the language in itself can be powerful in how you position that language. And so don't always think that it has to be a number, it has to be some sort of metric, but just think about how you can position yourself and really show the impact through the words that you're using. So this is an example of where I wanted to really showcase that and let you know that like there's two ways, to approach it. And so it's not, again, a one size fits all. You got to do what you feel is going to be best based on your experience, based on knowing what your experience is as far as like what you can pull out of the information that you have. So some people have gone about their work and they haven't tracked their metrics, they haven't tracked the goals that they've had and things like that. So they don't necessarily have the information, but use what you can to your advantage. And with that, I want to kind of reiterate again, like TAP formula, CAR formula. So when you think about writing your resume, when you think about writing your bullet points, think about what was it that you were doing? What did you actually do? And what was the result? So typically when you're thinking about the action, normally you're including some sort of like keywords in there, but ultimately what you did, what was the result? And it doesn't have to be in this order. So, and you don't necessarily have to use this formula. It's just one that I tend to leverage, but there are other formulas out there. But ultimately, think about scope, scale, impact, or what you did and what the result was and why was that important. So as long as you're keeping that in forefront of your mind, you're going to be on the right track when it comes to writing your bullet points. And here earlier, I talked about a stat that I wanted to share with you. So where it is important to try to quantify where you can is the fact that yes, there is a high number of hiring managers. And I pulled this article recently, and I want to say it might have been through Forbes, one of these major these outlets, but 70% of hiring managers tend to pass over resumes that don't have measurable results. And so the caveat that I would say is that, again, going back to that one example where that individual didn't have numbers, metrics, but she did show results. She talked about the results, not necessarily showing the numbers, but the language that she was using, subject matter expert. She's the one that they leverage to align business goals and objectives for positive business outcomes. That is her result. Like, that is who she is, and that is what she does. So thinking about how you're framing that narrative is equally important if you don't have the numbers essentially to kind of back up that statement. It's okay. Like, you can still showcase impact. So I just want to give that caveat there. And then quantifying. So again, driving this home, but we're going to kind of dig deeper into this outside of what I have here. In the beginning, I said that a lot of people tend to think of quantifying as percentages, dollar amounts, revenue, profit, sales. So cost savings, times, numbers, quantity, but sometimes people don't have that. That's just not the reality for some people, and that's okay. So there's other ways that you can think about it. So when you think about writing your bullet points, what I tell people, one of the things that I always ask people is, when you are writing out your experience, think about these three questions: how much, how many, how often. So how often are you doing this task? How many times a month does this happen? How much was it that they say asked you to kind of lean into the project? So did you have to take on a big scope of the project? Were you being asked to be like the primary head for, say, a project, for example? Did your manager come to you and say, does your manager frequently come to you, for example, and ask you to typically take on tasks that maybe they don't ask other people to do? So are you the one on the team that's kind of the go-to person? So that how much? Additionally, if you're thinking about comparison, like, compare it to last quarter. Maybe you're comparing it to competitors. What's the industry average? Maybe you can compare it to that. Maybe you can compare it to last year. Maybe you can just compare it to your past performance. So maybe you've exceeded performance expectations based on previous performance evaluation. So maybe you refer to that. So there's other ways that you can think about how you quantify. And additionally, these are some other questions. And so I also will share this with y'all, because these are other questions that come up that, you can ask yourself. So depending on what your setting is, again, not everybody has specific numbers in the sense of percentages, dollar savings or dollar earnings, but you can think about, did you improve here communications internally or externally? Did you have any sort of goals or quotas? Did you receive praise from a boss? So do you have a positive, feedback? For example, maybe there's a quote, some sort of like email that they sent you that you can quote. Did you accomplish one of the goals that maybe the team hadn't been able to accomplish, but you were able to come in and see something that the team wasn't able to see? So you were able to help them accomplish that goal. If your education, for example, if you're going to leverage your education, how many workshops have you attended? Have you attended conferences? What courses have you taken that are related to the role that you're trying to apply to? When we're thinking about soft skills, for example, so how are you demonstrating some of these skills? Like, how have you shown leadership, for example? So maybe, again, your manager has asked you every single time that a new person has been hired to come in, and you're the one that they ask to train that person. Or they say, hey, can this person shadow you? That is your manager entrusting you and seeing your leadership abilities. So that is a leadership skill. So think about some of those things. And then also accomplishments, so if you have any certifications against or licenses, did you receive any awards or recognition within your company? Those are all types of things that you can think about. And then also, if we're trying to showcase transferable skills, another one that people don't think about is like public speaking. So maybe you were asked to present at a conference or some large event for your company, or maybe you're the one that is asked internally to put presentations together and you're typically the one leading meetings. Those are all ways that you can showcase your communication skills, for example. So think about those type of examples as part of additional questions that you can ask yourself when we're thinking about, how can I showcase my impact? How can I quantify? How can I showcase that, not just what I did, but why it was important to the company and why it's important to my future company. Another topic I like to get into is transferable skills. This is a big one because a lot of times We may find ourselves in situations, especially if we're changing careers or if we're in a situation that maybe we don't check all of the boxes for the role that we're applying to. Transferable skills come in handy. So these are skills that typically you can use across different roles and fields and industries. So you want to make sure that you're not discrediting and discounting transferable skills when you are writing your resume. And so, what I typically tell people, here are some examples. We talked about leadership a second ago. Time management is one that you can refer to. So, in the previous resume that I showed you, for the person who was a manager at a coffee shop kind of throughout her career, one of the things that was really cool about her experience is that she juggled completing her bachelor's degree and working full time at the same time. So, those competing priorities. So, calling that out on her resume just to showcase again time management, the fact that one can juggle full-time school and full-time work, that's not easy to do. So think about again ways you can showcase your experience to show some of these transferable skills, because these are skills that are valuable. Problem solving. So you maybe you were brought in, again, the example I shared where you were able to find a solution to a problem for something that the team was trying to complete. They couldn't complete it, they couldn't figure it out as a team, you guys weren't able to figure it out, but you had an aha moment and you were able to solve that process improvement, or you were able to solve that issue that the team was having. And so problem solving, communication, presenting materials, you're asked to consistently present in front of team meetings, you're asked to consistently lead team meetings, you're asked to present at a conference, showcasing that in your resume because those are transferable skills. And then also when we think about transferable skills, we want to make sure that we are making sure that we're identifying these skills for yourself, because yes, you want to include them in your resume, but then also thinking about, as you're looking to the future, these are skills that you can potentially be considering for future roles if you're looking to make a career change. So being able to know what your transferable skills are and identify those skills for yourself, like things that you're really strong at, it's only going to help you in your career. And then it makes you more marketable. So when you're able to showcase that you are versatile and you can work within different job markets, right, or different industries, or you can work within different settings. So being able to show that you have that versatility within the job market is important, especially now in today's job market. So those transferable skills again can help you. And then being able to help you also expand your career. So if we're thinking about being able to advocate for yourself when it comes to new opportunities, being able to speak to some of those skills that you have, thinking about as you go into roles and maybe it's time for like a promotion, for example. Well, okay, maybe you don't have that direct experience and you haven't led a team, but you have done 32 different presentations and you've had to put these presentations together from scratch, and you've had to work with different teams in order to pull the material together for these different presentations. So you're telling me that I don't know how to work with teams, I don't know how to lead, I don't know how to make sure I'm getting things done? No, that's not correct, because I do. And here, this is the way I can show you that. And this is the transferable skill that I have. So these are very powerful when you know how to use them and speak to them. And so this is something I tell people, like, take some time and really understand your transferable skills, because it helps in your resume, but it also helps as you're navigating the job market. And it also helps just in your career in general. And then the last thing I will tell you, just when it comes to transferable skills, technical skills and soft skills can both be considered transferable skills. So maybe, for example, you've used data analysis and you've used that in project management, for example, because you've had to use data analysis and project management to help get stakeholders to buy into projects that you're working on. But then you're trying to now pivot into going into like a more of a actual data analytics role, and you can talk about how you had to go and pull data from this dashboard and how you've had to utilize that in your project management role, because data analytics, like, a lot of that is looking at dashboards and building dashboards, and so that is where you can showcase those transferable skills, although you haven't been in that role, but you've done that functionality and being able to speak to that. And then also thinking about even with soft skills, for example. So we talked about some of those examples. So for the one example I gave you with communication, so being able to say, hey, I've been the one that's been selected to lead these meetings. I've been the one that's been selected to pull presentations together and then actually present and facilitate. Like, those are skills that are transferable, because then when they're asking you to work in a different field or industry where you're having to say, work with different stakeholders, work cross-functionally, where you're having to work with the leadership team. The fact that you've been able to communicate and present and facilitate, that's a transferable skill that while you haven't maybe done that leadership, executive communication, you've done communication in other settings that shows that you're capable of doing communication in the setting that they're asking for. So thinking about those types of transferable skills that you have. And then last piece here is just talking about how that in the applications, being able to showcase again your transferable skills, it helps you stand out. It showcases that you can be a strong fit. So more of that, like, hey, here's my potential, and this showcases your likelihood of success in a role, and then also can help you in your overall career, just as you're progressing in your career. If you can speak to your transferable skills, typically you're going to earn more when it comes to money. You're going to earn more when it comes to being able to advocate for promotions. You're going to earn more when it comes to the time where you're like, hey, it's time for me to make a move and a change because I'm not making what I should be making here. So I'm going to take my business elsewhere. And you're able to use your skills in order to get you to that next level. So it's just good for your overall career. And then a few examples here of transferable skills. We've talked about some of them already, but here are just a few more examples. And then just as a reminder, you'll get this recording too, so you'll be able to go back. And now what do I do with it? So we've kind of talked about this a little bit here on how you can actually incorporate this and how you use these transferable skills when it comes to your resume. But really kind of the key components here is that when you're thinking about transferable skills, good places to include that is going to be either in your professional summary. We talked about how you can include some of that information there. You can include some of those skills in your skills section. You can include some of those skills even in your headline, for example. So maybe you have your name and you have 3 key attributes, 3 transferable skills that describe who you are and what you do. And so those 3 skills are really strong transferable skills that you showcase at the top of your resume. That could be a good place to put it there. You can weave it into your bullet points. So talking about some of how you're using these skills. So those are going to be things that you can do. And then on the endorsement side and recommendation side, this is going to be more on like the LinkedIn side, but I do like to call it out because if you do utilize LinkedIn and you have people in your network that can endorse your skills, that can give you recommendations, these are great ways for you to showcase that experience as well and have those transferable skills. So here I want to give you an example of what I was just talking about right now. So at the top of the resume, this person, we talk about their executive support, analytical precision, organizational strategy. So again, using some of those skills and talking about some of those transferable skills that they have. This person is actually a project manager, and her goal is to go more into the executive administrative assistant side as a personal choice. That's what she wants to do with her career, supporting CEO kind of executive level. So we wanted to really showcase that. So on the top example here, the one in gray, we talk about, her 10 years of experience, but we talk about how she supports high level senior executives. But there's also an aspect of still managing complex projects and so forth. So this is a good way to kind of weave in some of those transferable skills. And then on the bottom example, this person, again, customer service excellence. So the one in blue, effective communication, details and accuracy. So these are transferable skills. And so we're just calling these out because these are skills that she has that are very strong. And so we want to showcase that. And in her case, we have career focus, and insert job title just means depending on the role she's applying to, because for her, she's making a complete career change. More likely than not, she's going to have to insert the job title so that way they know, yes, this is the role she's applying to. As it goes through an ATS scan, we want to make sure that we're clear on the job title. But the big thing here is, like, I really want to focus on the transferable skills. So we weave some of that into the top section, into having those unique key attributes under this person's name, and then also weaving it into their profile summary. And then going through just quick run through of these last few items. So core competencies and skills section. So that really is going to be creating a section dedicated to having your skills. So typically you want to have both hard skills and soft skills. So you want to talk about the skills that you've used. So if that means that you are data analysis, stakeholder engagement, if you are project managing, whatever those skills are that are inherent to the type of role that you are applying to, Typically, when you're looking at job descriptions, you're going to see common trends and themes across these different roles. And so you want to make sure that you're highlighting those skills in some sort of skills section. And then if it's a role, say, where they're asking you to use specific tools, so maybe they're asking you to use Salesforce or Notion or Jira, having those skills listed and having maybe some sort of technical skills section could be beneficial to you as well, just because you do want to make sure that you're having those skills as part of one. Just if a recruiter is skimming through your resume, sometimes they're looking for the skills and just wanting to skim through and see if they can find those keywords that they're looking for. On the ATS side, you want to make sure that the ATS can pick up on some of those keywords and those skills, especially if they're listed in the job description. You want to make sure that you have those in your resume. And then from there, looking at this example again, so in the skills section, we label it as areas of expertise in this case, but really here we have their skills, this person's skills. So we talk about staff training and development, operational leadership. We talk about, project leadership, stakeholder engagement. Then under technical acumen, we do have some of the technical tools that this person has used. And the reason we list out like Microsoft Office, for example, which is pretty common nowadays. So sometimes people will ask, well, do I really need to have that? Do I not? Because is it not a given that this is something that people are using? In her case, in a lot of the job descriptions that she is applying to, they're specifically asking for Microsoft Office and they're calling out Word, Excel, PowerPoint, SharePoint. So we want to make sure we have that in there. And so for her, it was important to have that in there for that reason. But for another person, it may not be as important to have, say, that type of skill in there because, yes, a lot of people do use Microsoft. A lot of people do use Google Suite. A lot of people do use Zoom. But if they're asking for it in roles that you're applying to, then you want to have those skills in there because, again, thinking about the ATS and how it's getting through. So either have it in its own technical skills section or weave it somewhere into your bullet points where you're talking about that you facilitated meetings and did so through Zoom, for example, for 500 people or something like that. So just making sure that you're weaving that into the conversation in your bullet points is going to be important. And then a couple more we talked about earlier were the different sections. So if there is any industry related skills or certifications, you want to have those. So it'd be beneficial to have those sections at the bottom. So you might want to have a certification section. You might want to have an awards or honor sections if it's applicable to your role, your industry. And then special projects, any presentations, professional affiliations, those are all optional. And so all of these are optional. Outside, I would say, of the skills, that should be pretty standard. You should have some sort of skills section, but certifications, awards, honors, and then these other ones are all optional. But if it makes sense to have it, then have it in there and add that section in, especially if it's relevant to the type of role that you are applying for. So again, it's not mandatory, but it might be relevant and applicable. Think about if you're changing roles and doing a complete career change. Think about if, say, the experience that you have isn't a direct match where you don't check all the boxes, but say you can show that you did have that experience through an affiliation that you have or through a presentation that you did, or you did write a publication about that topic just to help showcase, like, while I haven't done this direct thing exactly, I have experience in the sense of like, this is how I did it. So that could be good to have that section if it's applicable. And then here, pretty standard with the degrees and educations and trainings. So you want to make sure that this is going to be more on the, if you just graduated, kind of, I would say 0 maybe to 3 years, having your like academic achievements could be important. But in the sense of like your education, you do want to have your education listed. If, say, you don't have like a degree, for example, but you completed some college credits, a way that you can include that is that, you could put that you were a bachelor degree candidate, meaning like you didn't graduate, but you did go and study. You do have some credits under your belt, but still showcasing that educational credential in that way. And then also making sure that, if you're going to be listing any like achievements, for example, that you're listing them based on what is going to be most recent. So thinking about chronological order, and then also making sure, again, going back to education, that we're including the degree, major, minor, institution, city, and state. One of the things I do tell people is when it comes to the dates and listing the dates as you get further in your career. So I would say if you want to put the date on there, I would say maybe up to like the 10-year mark, maybe include the date if, or, and I say date as in like the year. But typically I tell people drop the date when it comes to listing your education. Part of that is because potential bias, you know, one of the things that I have seen just in being in the recruiting space is that unfortunately there is bias because there are people that review resumes, and with people come bias because we are human beings that have our thoughts and opinions. And so one of the things that unfortunately I have seen is like they will deem somebody as overqualified, or they will deem and try to mark someone's age and like, oh, this person's been working for X number of years. So and so these are the types of conversations that I've had with hiring managers where I've then had to fight them and say, no, you are going to look at this resume based on the person's qualifications. We're not looking at them because of the date on the resume. So just being cognizant of that, I tell people I personally recommend dropping that date. When it comes to your work experience, there's only so much you can do. But if you have, say, earlier career experience that you want to show, so say you do have like 30 years of experience and you want to show some of that earlier experience, make an early career section, put the role that you had, put the company you work for, don't put the date on there, but just show that you have that experience. So again, we want to try and minimize where there could be potential bias. And so that's some of the advice that I give people that I work with when it comes to listing date. And so this is just going over the education again. So just how to list that out, and then talking one more time, just want to go over, kind of give you an overview one more time of like potential sections, optional sections that you might want to include, and then what to avoid. So we don't need to have references listed on your resume. Have a separate document for that. If the company needs it, they're going to ask you for it. So don't worry about including that as part of your resume. As best practice, I tell people, I personally, I know some people want to put personal hobbies, but focus on the qualifications that you have for the role. And really, that boils down to you have a limited amount of space to show your experience and market yourself. So you want to maximize how you're using that space, because that is prime real estate. So that typically is not going to be the best course of action to include personal hobbies, because you're taking up space that you can use for maybe an additional bullet point that you need to showcase your experience. And the other thing is demographics. They don't need to know anything about your age, salary, religion, ethnicity, health, anything of that nature. That needs to stay off. The only time that I've ever seen salary is more on the government side. That might be a situation where you might utilize like salary, for example, but other than that, you don't need to be listing any of that stuff. It's not their business. And the final note that I'll make before we wrap up here, and I know we are 2 minutes over time, so appreciate you all hanging with me here, is that I do want to address resume gaps. Let's see, should we list? That's a good question. So I personally would not. I would not recommend listing demographics because, again, when we think about hiring best practices and we think about inclusive hiring practices and we think about equitable hiring practices, you want to focus strictly on your status in the sense of like your qualifications. So I personally would not recommend putting that information. So the question is, should we list demographics if we're applying at a religious organization such as the Catholic or Catholic school board? No, that would be my answer to that question. But that's a really good question. And then on the resume gap, and if anybody else has questions, please include questions before we wrap up, but I'll just wrap up on the resume gap. So one of the things that I will say is that resume gaps are going to happen. They're becoming more and more common. There is no shame in having a gap in your resume. And this is something that employers are, while there's still some bias around that, you might find employers that may shy away from moving forward with people that have gaps. I will say that we are seeing strides in the sense positively that as long as you're addressing the gap and you're being honest about it, and it doesn't have to mean that you're going into this whole novel about what happened and why you were off out of work for 5 years, but just putting something like you had to provide care for a family member, or putting something about you took an educational sabbatical to attend, a master's degree program, or you took a planned career break, and then leaving it at that. Sometimes people just need a break. Or if you took a career break and maybe you went and got a certification, or you went and you traveled, you can list that you traveled or something, because that could showcase like just you getting out into the world, exploring different cultures, like that could be a positive thing. So don't make it a big thing. Just list the gap, list the years that you were out, and just leave it at that. So that would be my recommendation when it comes to gaps. But I will say on the positive side, this there was a study that LinkedIn did that said 96% of hiring managers are willing to hire somebody with a resume gap. And this even more so after COVID, they're starting to see a lot more flexibility when it comes to this, and people that are starting to open their minds and really just understand that people are people and life circumstances happen, and that there are going to be situations where not everybody is going to have a consistent work history, and that is okay. So just want to call that out as a last note, because this is one question again that I get a lot about addressing a resume gap. I have a lot of people, unfortunately, that feel like shame in having to list a resume gap, and that should not be the case. One should never be ashamed for having a gap in their career, but this is how I would list it. I would just keep it very brief to the point and list the years or the dates that you had that gap. And then, with that being said, that is it for this. This concludes this conversation. I do value feedback. So if there's anything that I could have elaborated on, if there's anything that, for future that you want to hear about or chat through, or have some sort of presentation like this where we have a workshop and walkthrough, please let me know. My goal is to help people find jobs, and my goal is to help people transition in their careers. And I know it's tough out there. Thank you so much.